$500,000. That is the number that just walked into the middle of Claressa Shields' victory parade and set the whole thing on fire. Not a chart number. Not a vision board number. The number that was filed with the Georgia State Athletic and Entertainment Commission for the biggest night of her year, and the internet is treating it like a body cam footage drop. Now, before I get into it, I need you to understand something about the story because everything you have been watching for the last week has been framed around the wrong question. Everybody is asking whether $500,000 is disrespectful to the self-proclaimed greatest woman of all time. That is the wrong question. The question is why she would ever allow that number to be the one on public record if the real money was actually where she says it is. And I promise you, by the time we get to the contract structure breakdown, and we are absolutely getting there, you're going to understand why the loudest person in this story has been arguing with the spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet has not blinked once. Because here is where this gets layered. On one end, you have a two-time Olympic gold medalist, a woman who has carried the equal pay conversation in her sport on her back, telling the world she is eating like the goat of all goats. On the other end, you have a piece of paper from a state commission showing $500,000 while her opponent, an Australian fighter with 5 pro wins and 1 draw, is listed at $54,000, and the people reading that paper are asking a very simple question. If the bag is really that fat, why is the paper this thin? Personal stakes, cultural stakes, systemic stakes, all of it colliding in one screenshot. And the craziest part? Claressa responded. She broke her silence. And the response she gave raised more questions than the number ever did. So let's set the scene, let the record state every name in this building, and then we're going to walk through exactly what happened, what was said, what was not said, and what this all means for the greatest marketing operation in the history of women's boxing. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe. Let's get into it. Now, let's get everybody oriented, because if you blinked, you missed the actual fight. August 15th, 2026, State Farm Arena in Atlanta, Georgia. Claressa Shields, fresh off running the heavyweight division and leaving with all the belts, decided to cut all the way down 3 weight classes to jump back into the middleweight division for the first time since 2023 and challenge Kaye Scott for the WBC and WBA women's middleweight titles. Let's be clear about who Kaye Scott is, because the narrative desperately wants you to think she's a nobody. She's Australian. She turned pro in 2023. She came into this fight with a record of 5 wins, 1 draw, 1 loss, and she had already held 2 world titles in her career before this night. She lost to Desley Robinson in December of 2024, bounced back with a majority draw against Olivia Curry in September of 2025, and then got the opportunity of her life against the woman who calls herself the GOAT. And the fight itself? Shields did what Shields does. She boxed her head off, knocked Scott down in the 6th round, and the towel came flying in, TKO, round 6, and the reigning heavyweight queen of the sport walks back into middleweight and takes the belts. 19-0. For knockouts now. It should have been a perfect night. Floyd Mayweather himself was sitting ringside. The biggest name in the history of the sport showed up to watch a women's title card, which says something real about how far this sport has come. And then the commission report dropped, and that perfect night turned into the most debated paycheck in boxing. The Georgia State Athletic and Entertainment Commission filed the disclosed purses for the entire card. This is standard practice. Every state does it, it's public record, and you can look at it the same way you look at a menu. And on that list, right there in black and white, was Claressa Shields at $500,000, Kaye Scott at $54,000, Joseph Hicks at $23,000, Troy Isley at $30,000. And the internet, the beautiful, chronically online, always zooming in internet, exploded. Because here's the thing you have to understand about Claressa Shields. For years, she has been the loudest voice in the sport. She's the one on every podcast telling you she's the greatest woman to ever put on gloves, that she's making generational money, that the sport owes her, and she's here to collect. She said on Cam Newton's show, reportedly, that her highest purse was $3 million for a fight. She signed what was announced as an $8 million minimum guaranteed multi-fight partnership with her promoter Salida Promotions and Win Records back in November of 2025, and she said that deal was a statement, creating something never done before in the sport. And now the commission paper says the biggest night of her year was worth $500,000 on the record. See the tension? See why this is not a normal purse story? This is a brand story. This is a woman whose entire persona is built on the idea that she gets paid like she talks, staring down a public document that says something different. And to make it even messier, she didn't let it breathe. She responded. She dropped a statement that people are still dissecting like it's a contract they're thinking about signing. So now we have to ask the question the whole internet is asking. What is actually going on with the $500,000? Let's walk through the surface evidence, layer by layer, because there are at least 4 things here that you need to see with your own eyes. Evidence number 1 is the commission sheet itself, and I want you to sit with this one. Claressa Shields, undisputed heavyweight champion, 2 Olympic gold medals, 19 world titles in her career, headlining a card in her own hometown showcase, listed at $500,000. Her opponent, $54,000. The undercard fighters, $23,000 and $30,000. Now, I already know what the defenders are going to say, and we'll get to that, but the sheet exists. You cannot argue with the sheet. The sheet went out, and every boxing account on the planet posted it within the hour, and the think piece machine went to work. Not just the haters, I want to be fair here. Even people who love Claressa were doing the math out loud, because $500,000 is a lot of money to a normal person, but it is not the greatest woman to ever fight money when you've spent 4 years telling us you're eating like a billionaire. Evidence number 2 is the response, and this is where it gets spicy. Claressa or somebody put out a statement, and I'm going to read it the way it reads. It said the Georgia Athletic Commission has her guaranteed base purse on record, which is the amount I was comfortable receiving up front and having publicly disclosed, and that the figure does not represent my total compensation. It went on to say her earnings for the event extend beyond the guaranteed purse and include her participation and partnership in the overall business of the event, including gate revenue, sponsorships, and other event-related revenue streams. And then, and this is the line that broke the internet, it said she would not disclose her opponent's compensation, out of respect for her privacy, while confirming Kaye Scott was paid more than the $54,000 being reported, the most Scott has ever been paid for a fight. Now, everybody pump the brakes and look at what's actually happening in that statement, because there are 2 separate things in it. There's a defensible business position. Equity in your own event is a real thing. Backhand money is real. We'll unpack that. And there's a rhetorical choice that has people howling. And we'll get to the howling. Evidence number 3 is the broader money story that makes this whole thing confusing, because this is a woman who, in February of 2025, said her purse for the Danielle Perkins fight was $1.5 million, and who announced that $8 million deal with Salida and Win Records in November of 2025 with all the champagne and the press releases and the first athlete signed to a music agency, Energy. The same woman who, again reportedly, tried to make a fight with Layla Ali happen. A rumored offer that reportedly went as high as $15 million before Ali shut the whole idea down. So you see the pattern, right? In the press release world, Claressa Shields is an $8 million athlete shooting for $15 million super fights. On the commission world, she's a $500,000 headline attraction. Those 2 worlds have to be reconciled, and the statement tried to reconcile them, and that's where the credibility gap opened up. And evidence number 4 is the sold-out mess, and I love this one because it's the most verifiable thing in the whole story. Her team ran with sold out for weeks, 16,000 people, a historic night, biggest gate in women's boxing, all of that. But people who know how to use a browser pulled up the venue seat map the morning of the fight and caught whole sections sitting dark blue. Somebody even went through the ticket flow pretending to buy 10 seats and got all the way to the payment screen. Tickets were available on the day. People online captured giveaways, mentions of comp seats, families being handed entry, and I don't need to litigate whether it was a full 16,000, because the baseline claim of a complete sellout was always going to be checkable, and a lot of the evidence friends of the channel collected says the story underneath the story is that it was a very good crowd that was also very cheap to get into. And then, to wrap the surface layer, let's talk about the state of the card itself, because that tells you everything about how this operation is being run right now. Danielle Perkins missed weight, and her whole title fight with Olivia Curry got wiped off the card. Ernesto Mercado lost his opponent twice. First, Emmanuel Tego missed weight, and then his replacement, Roger Hilly, came in nearly 9 pounds heavy, so Mercado's fight died too. The main card started late. The prelims ran so long that the ring walks for the main event were pushed toward 11:30 at night. For fights, a delayed broadcast, a headline fight that ended in a stoppage, and then this purse report on top of it. Now, I want you to hold all of that because the surface is damning, but the surface is never the whole story. And if you think I'm done, oh, do I have more for you? The stands are really not going to like this next part because we are about to step into the cultural side of this mess, and that's where the gloves come off. And, oh, do I have more for you? Because the surface stuff, the sheet, the statement, the seat maps, that's just the appetizer. The real entertainment is in what the people around the story are saying, and one person in particular decided to turn this whole thing into a comedy special. I'm talking about Chris Cyborg, who saw that $500,000 and decided she had the most important thing to say in this entire saga. And for those of you who've been sleeping, Cyborg is the former UFC champion, one of the most violent women to ever compete in combat sports, and she has been circling Claressa Shields for months with a very specific offer. So we're going to go through the cultural evidence now, piece by piece, and I promise you the last one changes the whole picture. Piece 1 is the post that started the second wave. Chris Cyborg went online, and I want you to hear this in the tone it was written because this is a woman who does not do subtlety, and she laid it out like a receipt. She said she's a 2-time Olympic gold medalist and former UFC champion. Wait, no, that's actually the irony. She opened by reminding everyone that Claressa is the 2-time Olympic gold medalist, and then she dropped the hammer. I offered Claressa Shields $2 million. She took $500,000 to fight an older woman with less pro wins and 0 career KOs. Instead, goofiest woman of all time. Now, before we react, let's put the receipts next to the claim because there are actually 2 posts living inside that one quote. Cyborg has been publicly offering Claressa Shields $2 million to box her at 160 pounds before the end of 2026. But here's the detail that gets lost in every single repost. Multiple outlets and people close to the situation have reported that the $2 million offer was actually for 2 fights, a boxing match, and then an MMA fight, a doubleheader, 2 sports, 2 sets of rules, 1 package deal. So when Cyborg says, I offered her $2 million and Claressa says she can't even pay herself $2 million, they're both telling the truth about 2 different things, and that gap is exactly where this whole beef lives. Piece 2 is Claressa's actual response, and this is the part one need you to hear without the tribal noise. When she finally addressed the Cyborg offer, this was back in July, before this whole purse mess even happened, she said, and I'm quoting her energy here, "What a bum, talking about she's offering me $2 million a fight. She ain't there. She can't even pay herself $2 million. Now, that's a cold line, I'll give her that. But watch the word choice. Offering me $2 million a fight. A fight. Singular. She took the doubleheader offer and described it as a single fight offer, which conveniently makes her rejection sound like she turned down easy money. That's the kind of detail that makes people rewind the clip. Piece 3 is the statement controversy, and I'm going to be careful here, because this is the part where the comment section divides. A lot of people, and I mean a lot, including people who watch every one of her fights, looked at that respect for her privacy line and said out loud, "This does not sound like her. That's not me saying it. That's the culture saying it." And where does that skepticism come from? It comes from the fact that Claressa Shields has never once in her public life been the respect her privacy type when it comes to other fighters' business. She's the one who plays clips, who calls people out by name, who makes things personal by design. That's literally her brand, the unfiltered trash-talking goat, who says what she wants about whoever she wants. So the same woman who has publicly aired out other people's business for years suddenly discovering a deep reverence for her opponent's financial privacy on the exact night her own number leaked? The culture clocked it immediately. And I'm not going to pretend this is evidence of anything criminal because it's not. It's just a credibility note, and it's a fair one. Piece 4 is the counterargument I want to deal with honestly before I keep going because if I don't, you're going to think I'm only telling one side. The defenders say, back-end money is real. Equity is real. She's not stupid enough to take a flat fee when the event is going to make serious money, and the fact that she structured this as a partnership means the $500,000 is literally nothing compared to what she'll clear on the back end. And you know what? That's a legitimate business position. Boxers with leverage take % of the pie, not just a check. That part is true. But here's where the counterargument runs out of road, and this is the cultural evidence that feels like it changes the entire picture. Piece 5. People went frame by frame through the photos of that event, the ring, the ropes, the turnbuckles, the mat, looking for the sponsor roll call you normally see on a big-time boxing card. And they found themselves. Salida Promotions, her own promoter, on the canvas. Win Records, the agency her boyfriend Papoose is signed to, and the company she does her partnership deal with, plastered on the ropes. OnlyFans branding on the turnbuckles. Her own promotion, her own partners, on the most visible advertising real estate in the entire building. Where were the Cokes, the body armors, the movie posters, the Fortune 500 names? Somewhere else, apparently, because if the big sponsors were actually paying to be on those ropes, the ropes would look like a Super Bowl ad, and instead they looked like a family barbecue where everybody brought the same tray. And that's the moment the cultural story and the money story become the same story. When you tell me you're making millions on the back end, I need to see the brands that are paying for that back end. And when the most prominent branding in your venue is your own company, your boyfriend's company, and an adult platform, the back end starts looking a lot less like a jackpot and a lot more like a promise to yourself. But now we need to talk about the real story. Because up to this point we've been watching this like fans, and that's exactly what both sides want. I want to take everything we've gathered and pivot hard into the business side of this thing because this purse controversy is not a boxing story. It's a finance story wearing boxing gloves. And once you see the mechanics, you can't unsee them. So let's do 3 levels of the system. The way I'd break it down in my own head if I was the one who had to write the check. Level 1. Understand what a disclosed purse actually is and isn't. When a state athletic commission publishes a purse, they are publishing the base compensation from the contract, the guaranteed number that was filed with the governing body. That number is real, it's contractual, and it's public by law. It is not a full audit of everything the fighter earns from the event, and nobody, not one credible person in the sport, claims it is. Sponsorships, percentage of pay-per-view revenue, back-end participation, bonuses, all of that lives outside the disclosed number. That's just how the sport works, and it's how Mayweather built half his career. His disclosed Showtime guarantees were around $32 million for fights where everybody knew the real number was much higher because the real number included the PPV points and the site fees, and everything else that never touches the commission paperwork. So in that sense, the defenders are structurally correct. The $500,000 does not equal total compensation, and my saying the sheet exists doesn't change the fact that the sheet is only layer 1 of the cake. But now let's apply the pressure in the other direction because this is where the analysis gets uncomfortable for the narrative. If the disclosed number is just the base and the real money is on the back end, and the back end is so fat that the $500,000 is basically a rounding error, then why is the base set at $500,000? The base is a number she negotiates. She has leverage. She's the headliner. And here's the thing about disclosed purses. Fighters absolutely do negotiate the disclosed number, and players with real power push it up because a high disclosed purse is free marketing. It tells the next opponent, the next sponsor, the next broadcaster, and the public exactly how much you're worth. Floyd didn't leave $32 million on the disclosure sheet by accident. He wanted that number out there because that number was his brand. So when Claressa's team says she was comfortable disclosing $500,000, that word, comfortable, is doing so much heavy lifting. The honest question every businessman watching has to ask is, comfortable compared to what? If you genuinely clear 7 figures on a fight weekend, you set the disclosed number at something that protects your positioning, not something that gives your critics a screenshot to run with. The fact that she was comfortable with $500,000 on the public record tells me the contract base was $500,000, and the fact that she needed a 4-paragraph statement to explain that the base isn't everything tells me that the back end she's counting on is a lot less certain than the press releases suggest. That brings us to level 2, the pie and how many hands are in it. This is where I want everybody to really focus, because the economics here are brutal and nobody explains them. A boxing event is not one business, it's 7 businesses wearing a trench coat. You have the promoter, Salida Promotions, Dimitri Salida's company, her promoter since day one, the same company that signed the $8 million deal with her. You have the venue, State Farm Arena, which is taking its cut of the gate before anybody sees a dime. You have the streaming partner, DAZN, which aired the 4-fight championship portion, and Zeus Network, which aired the prelims, and both of those platforms are monetizing the event in their own ways, through subscriptions and sponsorships that the fighters only see if they negotiated a piece. You have Win Records, the music agency that signed her as its first athlete and houses her boyfriend Papoose, which is part of the marketing apparatus. You have the undercard fighters, the matchmakers, the commissions, the insurance, the legal, all eating before the headliner gets served. And then you have the open question that literally nobody can answer. How does Papoose get paid? Because he's at every event, he's part of the brand, he's signed to win, and one of the things this entire saga has done is get people asking whether there's a line item for the boyfriend in a deal that's supposed to be about the fighter. Now, I'm not saying there is, I'm saying the structure is so opaque that nobody can rule anything out, and opacity is never free. It's a cost. It's a tax on credibility. And when you multiply all these hands together, the promoter's cut, the venue's cut, the platform's cuts, the partner's cuts, the mystery cuts, you start to understand why a fighter with a big disclosed number can still walk away with less than the number, and a fighter with a small disclosed number can walk away with more. Both things can be true. But here's the part that actually matters. Equity only pays if the event actually generates outside money. And that's level 3. The GOAT math, or more precisely, the difference between a brand and a box office draw. Let's talk about who Claressa Shields actually is in the marketplace with love, because I respect what she's done. 2 Olympic gold medals. 5 division world champion. 19 professional titles. Undisputed at heavyweight, undisputed at middleweight after Saturday. ESPN's #1 pound-for-pound women's fighter on the planet. That's not a fantasy. That's a resume that has no equal in the history of her sport. Nobody in the history of women's boxing has won what she's won. Nobody. But resume is not the same thing as box office, and this is the cold truth that this whole controversy has dragged into the light. She has 19 wins and 4 knockouts. The knockout percentage is tiny for a fighter who presents herself as a terrifying, overwhelming force. And before you jump on me, I'm not saying entertainment value equals violence. I'm saying that in the pay-per-view economy, the difference between a great fighter and a can't-miss attraction is often the difference between I want to see her win and I don't want to miss what she does to this person. And the matchmaking pattern over the last couple of years, dropping 3 weight classes to fight a 5'11" woman, taking the heavyweight belts against opponents who are moving up in weight or coming in on short notice, has the fingerprints of a promotional strategy that's about protecting the record and the brand rather than testing the box office. Cyborg said it the cruelest way. She took $500,000 to fight an older woman with less pro wins and 0 career KOs. It's mean, but the underlying observation is the thing everybody in the industry is thinking. The fights that would actually move the needle. Layla Ali, who reportedly turned down that rumored $15 million offer, or Cyborg, the doubleheader. Those fights aren't getting made, and the fights that are getting made are the ones where the risk is low and the disclosed number matches. So now we're at the point where I have to tell you what I actually think is the truth of this entire situation, and I want you to sit down for it because it's not the version either side of the internet is selling you. Here's the truth bomb, and I'm going to take my time with it. The $500,000 is real. The $8 million deal is real. The statement is real. The sponsorship drought is real. And the reason all of these things can be real at the same time is that they are all true about different layers of the same contract. And the war you're watching on the internet is a war about which layer gets to define the story. Claressa Shields is not being scammed by some evil promoter out of money she's actually earning. That's not what the sheet says, and I've read too many of these to pretend otherwise. What the sheet says is that the market, the actual, honest, ticket-buying, subscription-paying, sponsor-writing market, currently prices Claressa Shields' guaranteed value at $500,000 for a fight against Kaye Scott in a venue that her own team had to fill with comp seats, on a card where 2 of the biggest undercard attractions fell apart because people couldn't even make weight. That's not a conspiracy. That's a market signal. And the reason this particular disclosure hits so hard is that it collided with the most carefully constructed brand in the history of women's combat sports. The I'm the GOAT, I'm getting my just due. This deal is a statement. I make millions. I'm the first athlete signed to a music label. Look at the $8 million machine. The brand says one thing. The sheet says another. And when a brand and a sheet disagree, only one of them blinks. Now here's the part one really need you to understand, because this is the part that makes me sound like a hater to people who don't want to see it and like a genius to people who do. It's not my total compensation defense actually concedes the entire argument. Think about it. If the disclosed number was truly irrelevant, if the back end was so real, so fat, so guaranteed, the statement would have said anything other than what it said. It would have said, I made 7 figures. It would have said, watch the sponsorship sheet. It would have said the number on the commission website is 10% of what I took home. Instead, it said she was comfortable with $500,000 being public, that the total is more, and that she won't tell you how much more out of respect for the other fighter's privacy, using her opponent's privacy, of all people's privacy, as the shield for her own financial opacity after years of airing out the finances and the business of everybody who crossed her. That's not a money move. That's a storytelling move. And the reason it lands as a dodge is because it's using the one thing Claressa Shields has never had in her entire public career, discretion. At the exact moment discretion is most convenient. We're supposed to believe the woman who has never once protected anyone else's privacy in public suddenly developed a code of honor about Kaye Scott's check? The fighter, who has spent years telling us exactly how much everyone else supposedly makes, supposedly doesn't make, supposedly deserves, suddenly can't talk numbers? Come on. That's not privacy. That's a contract clause she didn't want litigated in public, because the back end of this event, the gate revenue, the sponsorships, the event-related stream she's counting, has a big, uncomfortable asterisk attached to it. Those revenue streams only pay out if the event actually generates revenue, and the event's biggest sponsor was herself. Use your own eyes. The ropes were covered in her own brand, her promoter's brand, her man's label, and OnlyFans. You look at a Floyd Mayweather fight, and the programming around the ring is Coca-Cola and Tecate, and every multinational that wants to buy the shine. You look at this card, and the programming is a family photo. And that's the deepest truth of the whole thing. If the back end pays, it pays in numbers we'll never see, from sources that were visibly absent. So when Cyborg comes out and says, I offered her $2 million and she took $500,000, the response that would actually end Cyborg's argument is the one Claressa hasn't made. She hasn't said, I made $3 million on that night. She hasn't said, here's my tax transcript, now shut up. She said, that figure does not represent my total compensation, which is the kind of sentence a lawyer writes when the figure is small enough to be embarrassing and the total is vague enough to be unprovable. And I want to be fair to the other side of the ledger too, because there is one. The reason she can't just laugh at the $500,000 and walk away is that her actual payday lives in that back end. And the back end of a half-sold arena with no outside sponsors is not the back end she needs to justify an $8 million contract. She's not a victim of the system here. She's a founder of the system. She signed the partnership. She's an equity partner in her own events. She's the one who chose the structure, and structures are only as good as the revenue they generate. And right now, the revenue side of the structure is the weakest part of the whole operation, and the commission sheet is just the part of the operation you're allowed to see. That's the part that makes this story genuinely important beyond the gossip. One of the best fighters who has ever lived is discovering that the hardest fight in boxing is not in the ring. It's between the brand you've built and the receipts the public can verify. And the bill for that fight? It's going to be paid by the next generation of women in this sport, because every time the biggest name in the game throws a historic event that can't fill the building and can't attract the sponsors, the people who finance women's boxing tighten the purse strings for everyone behind her. But let me give you the part of the story that nobody on either side of the timeline wants to talk about, because it's the part where the right person is still winning. Kaye Scott. Think about her for a second. A 30-something Australian fighter, 5'11" coming in, 2 prior title runs, got the biggest opportunity of her career, traveled halfway around the world, fought the greatest woman in the history of the sport in front of Floyd Mayweather, got knocked down in the 6th round, got up. She got up, the towel came from her corner, not from her heart, and she walked out of that building having been paid, according to the very statement we've been dissecting, more than she has ever been paid for a fight in her entire career. That's the quiet miracle of this sport that the purse drama is drowning out. For every story about a $500,000 headliner who wants more, there's a story about a fighter who just made the biggest check of her life and had the night of her career, and nobody interviewed her about it because the internet was too busy doing math on the headliner. And here's the other thing the right people are winning, the audience. Because I'm going to tell you something that probably sounds weird coming from a channel that just spent 20 minutes breaking down a spreadsheet. The fact that 16,000-ish people filled most of a major arena to watch 2 women fight for 2 middleweight titles, the fact that Floyd Mayweather sat ringside, the fact that DAZN carried the card, the fact that this purse disclosure is the most discussed financial document in combat sports this year, that is progress. That is the sport Claressa Shields said she was building actually being built, even if she's not the one collecting the way she thought she would. The irony of this entire saga is that the GOAT narrative and the purse drama are 2 sides of the same win. 5 years ago, nobody would have written think pieces about a women's boxing purse. 10 years ago, a $500,000 disclosed purse for a women's main event would have been a fantasy. The discourse is loud because the sport is real now, and the sport is real now because she and a few others refuse to let it stay quiet. So here's my contrast one-liner for the whole story, and I want you to keep it. One fighter spent the week explaining what the number means, while the other fighter just got the biggest check of her life and went home with her head high. The woman who fought is undefeated in the thing that matters. And as for Claressa herself, I'm not writing her off, and you shouldn't either. She's still 19, and she's still undisputed in 2 divisions. She's still the biggest name in her sport by a mile. The only fight she's actually losing right now is the fight against her own narrative, and that's the easiest fight in the world to win, because all she has to do is stop talking and start scheduling. If she wants to prove the sheet is a lie, she doesn't need a statement. She needs a fight that people pay real money to see. And I genuinely think she knows that. The frustration in that Cyborg response was the sound of someone who knows exactly what the cure is and doesn't want to take the medicine. The medicine is the fight that scares her, the fight where the disclosed number finally matches the self-image. That's the path back. That's the hero's route. And the good news is, the path is still wide open. Because this is only the start, and I mean that in the most specific way possible, not in the vague subscribe for more chaos way. Let me tell you exactly what to watch next, because this story has about 4 more chapters in it, and they're all already lining up. Chapter 1. The sequel fight. The easiest test in the world. And I said this before the first fight, so we're keeping receipts, was always going to be, if Atlanta is really her town, if the model really works, run it back. Put Claressa Shields' next fight in Atlanta, same arena, without the Zeus packaging doing the heavy lifting, and see what the ticket map looks like when nobody is comping sections. If the city shows up, the model works, and the $500,000 really is pocket change. If the city doesn't show up, we've learned something that no amount of statements can unlearn. Chapter 2. The cyborg situation, which is the only fight on Earth that can actually settle this entire argument. The woman has an offer on the table, reportedly a doubleheader, boxing and MMA, $2 million for the package, and every week that offer sits there unanswered. It's a political ad for the side that says the brand outranks the box office. I want to watch what happens when the money gets real enough that she can't pay herself $2 million, stops being a punchline, and starts being a call that has to be answered with a pen. And Chapter 3 is the $8 million deal itself, because after the Scott fight, the clock is ticking on the next installment of that partnership. Who's next, at what weight, on what platform, and most importantly, at what disclosed number. Watch that next commission filing like it's the stock ticker, because that number is the honest scoreboard. And when you see it, you'll know whether the last 2 weeks changed anything real or just gave everybody content. Before I go, I need to leave you with the next one because I already know where this train is headed and I refuse to let you miss it. The next video is the one everybody thinks they already know, but literally nobody has actually broken down. Chris Cyborg's $2 million offer, the fine print nobody read. Here's the shock. The offer was never a single $2 million boxing match. The doubleheader was the bait, and the MMA portion is the part Claressa will never sign. Here's the mystery. The contract terms floating around say the boxing fight was the easy money and the real risk was in the cage. And there's a reason the same fighter who fights anybody in 4-ounce gloves suddenly can't find the pen for this one. And here's the payoff. By the end of it, you're going to know exactly who's ducking who, why the $2 million was never really $2 million the way it was sold, and which one of them actually has everything to lose. That one's going to make this purse saga look like the opening bell. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Drop your thoughts on the $500,000 in the comments. Tell me if you think she's underpaid, overpaid, or perfectly positioned, and I'll see you on the other side. The spreadsheet doesn't lie. It just waits.